here because you're struggling with something in your body and you're hoping that you may get some answers? Or are you guys just here to learn some stuff and see if it can make you better at lifting and just, avoiding injuries down the road? Both? Good. Both.
We're all banged up in some way or another.
Yeah, I figured that makes sense.
We're going to talk a lot about it, but part of the reason why we wanted to do this, especially with people like yourselves who take care of themselves, work out regularly, you want to be able to do that for the rest of your life and be able to maintain that level of performance. So yes, part of it is like, okay, how do we get out of pain? Why is this happening? Why is this happening on a deeper level? What are some of the connections in our body that we're not making? But another part of it is, how do we optimize our performance? How do we look at things that we're not doing as well as we could be? And, not to get ahead of the presentation, but we'll talk about all of those things and how we've kind of changed how we practice and look at the body over the years, because unfortunately, when we got out of PT school, they didn't teach us this stuff, so we had to figure it out on our own as we went along the way. And now as we've kind of shown this to some of our patients and utilize it ourselves, we realize it makes a whole a bigger difference just having that awareness in your body and understanding why these things either A, hold you up, or B, that you continue to have pain with certain activities. So we'll talk about all of that. Hopefully that makes some connections for you. So what I would like all of you guys to do right now, and you don't have to say it out loud, but if there is something that bothers you right now, think about it in your head. If there is a specific lift or movement that bothers you, a specific transition, going from squats to pull-ups, whatever it is, we want you guys to think about that now. And as we go through the presentation, see if you start to make some connections on your own about maybe why some of those things are holding you up. And then we'll save that for the end and kind of talk about it together, because chances are if one of you are experiencing this, somebody else in this room might be experiencing it. So we want to make sure that we address that. So just like a little bit of an introduction, first of all, Pat, thank you so much for having us. We are super excited to be in front of you guys today. Pat and I went to St. Pat's together, so we grew up in Huntington together, so this is kind of special for me. And I'm excited to kind of bring this style to you guys and open up your brains a little bit about how we look at the body. Mike, if you don't mind just introducing yourself,
Yes.
and kind of going through.
Dr. Mike, I was one of the founders of this company with my business partner, Dr. Lev, about 10 years ago, and we recently brought Pat on as our third member. And just a little bit about myself. I was born and raised in Westbury, Nassau County. After I went to Chaminade with Pat as well, and at Chaminade I played football, wrestling, lacrosse, 2004.
Oh man, so we played lacrosse against each other.
Oh yeah?
For Washington, and we hated each
Okay.
other.
Everybody hates us.
Yeah, we were really damn shocker.
Every game we showed up to, we could tell everybody had that one in asterisk. They couldn't wait to.
I graduated with 4 oils.
Yeah. So football, wrestling, and lacrosse at Chaminade. I played every sport under the sun when I was younger. And after high school, I was originally thinking about playing sports in college, but I went to New York Institute of Technology in Old Westbury. They have a accelerated medical program where they ask you to complete pre-med in 3 years instead of 4, and that just eliminated any chance I had of playing legitimate college athletics. So I just started working out. I started working out in middle school or high school, lifting weights in the garage. I had a close friend of mine whose dad was in the gym 7 days a week, absolutely in love with it, and he taught us some things, and we got I think we pooled our money together when we were 13 years old and bought a flat bench. Did 8,000 sets in the garage every day until we couldn't feel our arms anymore. But I have a lot of experience with athletics, weightlifting, and then just with physical therapy in general. As Pat said, I graduated in 2011 with my doctorate degree from NYIT, and only a couple of years after that, Dr. Lev and myself started this company mainly because of just frustration. I don't know how many of you guys have actually experienced any injuries, gone to physical therapy in the past. I hope that if you have, it's been a great experience and you got better real quick, but at a lot of typical PT clinics, you have plinths lined up all along the wall. You're one of 20 different people in there that are receiving treatment. You don't really have the individualized attention of your PT for more than just a few minutes at the beginning of the session. And then they're telling you to go off and do some strengthening exercises that, on paper, in theory, should help. But I worked at a clinic like that, and it only took me a few months until I couldn't really look people in the face anymore, because everything that we were doing was very cookie cutter, right? If you come in and your knee hurts, we got stuff for the knee. See you later. I got 10 other people to talk to, right? So when Lev and I started this business, it was really just, let's do a full hour one-on-one, and at the bare minimum, let's just show everybody that we care a lot more. Because I feel like that's the biggest thing that people are really lacking when they go to PT, is really feeling like anybody gives a crap, that they're really getting the individualized attention that they were hoping that they would get when they came in with this injury that they're, so concerned about. And I think this is especially true with people like yourselves. I think you guys have proven over the last 5, 10, 20 years of your lives that you're really dedicated to moving, staying fit, and when you get hurt, you want people to really treat that with respect, and not just run you through some drills and say, hey, if it works, if it doesn't, sorry. So we started treating people one-on-one in the city. Here's Dr. Lev right here, our third partner. And for the last 10 years, we've just been slowly but surely growing our practice and our reputation in Manhattan. We're in Flatiron right now, and it's been, thankfully, a big success, in large part to a lot of what we're going to talk to you guys about today. As Pat said earlier, a lot of what's in here that we're really going to discuss, we didn't even learn in graduate school when we were receiving these advanced doctorate degrees, right? A lot of this stuff has been taught to us from courses that we just take as continuing education to keep brushing up on our skills. And we were very, very fortunate enough to stumble upon a couple of these and realize that these were not just classes to take just to say we took another class. They were like really eye-opening information that helps us look at the body way more holistically. So when Pat mentioned earlier about think of an exercise that you guys struggle with, right? That doesn't necessarily mean pain. I think all of you probably have exercises that you guys do in your workouts that you love. Deadlifts, I've always been great at deadlifts, right? But maybe the person you're working out right next to says, I hate deadlifts. I've never been good at deadlifts. That's also what we're talking about. If you guys have exercises that you don't really know why, but you just never loved it. I've never been good at deadlifts. I've always plateaued or really made small incremental progress that I have grinded to make. But over here on the shoulder press, I'm putting another 5 pounds on the bar every week, right? A lot of us have those imbalances in the gym, and I think today might be very eye-opening for some of you guys as to why. Why does your body not agree with that particular movement? Some of it might have a lot to do more with the structures in your body and how well you can be aware of them, get them into the right positions, move them the right way. These are game-changing concepts that will help you so much. And some of the drills that we're going to get you into, so this is a bit more interactive to get you guys moving and feeling stuff, we're also going to try to correlate a lot of these drills and concepts to various things that we know that you guys do in a CrossFit gym, and see if we can get a couple of light bulbs to go off today, really specific and individualized for each of you, rather than us just, wrapping off a bunch of information that hopefully is semi-interesting about the body. Dr. Lev, if you want to give a quick, brief background of yourself.
Hey guys, I'm Lev. I'm just taking it in. It's a beautiful facility. I've never been here before.
Yeah, this place is sick.
Incredible. It's like an adult playground. It's so awesome. My name is Lev. I went to school with Mike. We graduated together. Worked in a bunch of places in the city. Didn't like what the profession was. Realized I couldn't help anybody. I couldn't help anybody in 5 minutes and just passing them off an aid. So we opened up our own clinic. And over the course of the years, we've taken a bunch of awesome courses that help us get people like you guys performing as best as you can, and also out of pain if that's something that you need. I used to be an amateur Muay Thai fighter for a long time. It's actually the only sport I've ever done in my life. The only thing I know. I don't really know anything else. And recently I began running. So that's kind of what I do now for fun because I'm too old to get hit in the face.
Just to wrap up my own intro, I played sports in high school as well. This is where the personal aspect of it comes for me. I had some knee pain in high school, went to a specific orthopedic that kind of mismanaged me in my opinion as I look back. It took me out of all sports, wrestling, lacrosse, football, put me in these like huge knee braces that really didn't do anything. And unfortunately, it took me like another like 15 years to figure out what I needed to get out of pain, and it had nothing to do with my knees. It had everything to do with my hips and the planes of movement that my hips couldn't attain. I still to this day have not had knee pain, but for me, when it comes to patients telling me that something's being taken away from them, lifting, running, it's personal. Like I want to get them back to that. There's a deeper reason why this is happening. Somebody just needs to take the time with you to figure it out. All right, so we gave you a decent intro about ourselves and kind of how our practice started. Now, in terms of some of the treatment techniques that have really elevated how we look at the body, so we want to make sure we give credit to those institutions. The first one is Postural Restoration Institute. So this is looking at the fact that, similar like Mike was talking about, when you get out of PT school, you have these understandings that maybe might not be a full reality, but the first understanding that I had was that the body is just symmetrical. My shoulder does this on this side, it does this on this side, right? And I would just try to get the body symmetrical, but the reality is that we are born with a natural asymmetry, which Dr. Love will talk a lot deeper about in a couple of slides. And what happens is that over time, we either through injury or repetitive movements, we fall deeper into this asymmetrical pattern, or maybe we start bearing away from it in very awkward ways that kind of cause injury and irritation. So this treatment technique is meant to utilize drills and even some hands-on techniques at times to reconnect the brain with the body, get you out of positions that you are stuck in, and try to open you back up to this normal asymmetry so you can live life normally and live a balance, visiting both sides of your body. Mike's going to talk about AIM, and then he'll take you through some of the foundational concepts and movements of skull, ribcage, and pelvis, and that will kind of be the underlying foundation of how we look at the body, and that's what we want to give to you guys today, is the foundation of how your body's supposed to move.
So AIM stands for Anatomy in Motion. It was originally created and dreamt up by a guy named Gary Ward. Lev and I, years ago, we actually flew to Santa Cruz, California to take this course because Lev had stumbled upon this information a few years back, took the course, came back to our office, and for weeks would not stop talking to me about how his brain was just melting with what this guy said. And so we flew to California, shut the business down for a week, and it was one of the greatest things we ever did. This guy is not a physical therapist. He's not a doctor. He is barely even in the medical profession at all. He used to work at a ski resort fitting people for their ski boots. And he became obsessed with how everyone's feet are so different, yet so similar, the way we stuff them into these shoes. And he just started taking that fascination and running with it. What he essentially did was, he went through what we call the gait cycle, walking, right? Every step that you take, there's phases of your gait cycle. And he went through each and every bone in the body and talks about where each of those bones is supposed to be moving during these different phases of your gait pattern. He calls it the flow motion model. This has been absolutely incredible for us for a few different reasons. Number one, it really helps us understand a bit more of the big picture. That's what we try to do when we see people, is give them a bit more of a story about what's actually going on in their body. When you go to PT and you say, my left knee is killing me, right? We ask you a million questions and half of them have nothing to do with your knee, right? The very first thing we do is have you walk. We look at your entire body, head to toe. This is a big piece of why we do that. Because if we know that your knee hurts when you do something very specific, such as, when I do a squat, my knee only hurts when I'm going down, but it doesn't hurt as I go up. Well, we already know that the mechanics at your knee while bending are different than the mechanics at your knee when you're straightening. So we start to get the wheels turning and we can think, okay, it seems like this person may be having an issue with the fact that their thigh bone, their femur, cannot internally rotate. Well, when else should that happen? We know when you're walking when that should happen, and if you can't do it when you're just standing there in an isolated incident, what are the chances you're actually doing it when you walk, right? And for us, walking is huge, because there's not a lot of things that we do more than walk. So this has been an enormous piece for us, especially in Manhattan, where the average person takes 5,000 to 10,000 steps a day. Here, not as much obviously, we drive around a bit, but walking is still absolutely huge. And what many of us don't realize is that these imbalances, these compensations, these weird ways that we move our body, they live within our body. Every step that we take, it's not only when we're here in the gym, right? So when we treat people, we try to assess everything. Why can't that thing move the right way? What else around it is potentially moving incorrectly? And this type of information has been huge. So today we're going to talk a lot about 3 planes of movement. He's obviously not the first person to discuss 3 planes of movement, but boy, does he go really, really in depth with it. We're going to maintain main structures today, like your pelvis, your rib cage. Many of us don't understand how these things should move, but this stuff has been absolutely fantastic, especially when we tie it all back into just your everyday life, right? We want to make sure that if you're moving funny on your right leg, we want to make sure that you understand how and why to do that, to move that correctly throughout your entire life, not just when you get into the gym, plant your feet and get ready for that squat. Because a lot of times when you feel pain with that squat, it has a lot more to do with what you did for the last 6 hours, walking around, living your life, as opposed to the 3 seconds before you begin that lift when you get set up for it. So that's what we try to do, is try to implement those movement patterns into our treatments and your everyday life, and the anatomy and motion model has been really big for that.
I just want to add one thing to what Mike said. So every single joint in your body moves in all 3 planes with every single step you take, and that step, the step that you take is about 0.6 to 0.8 of a second. So all of these movements from your foot to your knee to your hip to your every single rib, your spine, even your cranial bones, they all have to happen all in 3 dimensions in 0.6 to 0.8 seconds. And that's why this is so important, and we take 10,000 steps a day. That's why we took that course, because what we realized was, oh, if somebody can't access that in their gait cycle, there's no way they're going to access it in the deadlifting, squatting, overhead pressing, running. It's just not going to happen. Just want to build on that. So that like key piece of information, just the amount of movement that has to happen, and all of your joints move in every single plane, which is pretty crazy when you just think about it. Because Mike is going to show you some movements now. We're going to do them, and all of that happens when you take a step. So even full shoulder flexion will happen during your gait cycle, and we'll show you how in a second. So that's like a big takeaway from that. If you don't have it in your gait cycle, if you can't do that, and say you like evert your foot or you don't swing your arm as much, that's something that's going to show up in your workouts. It's going to show up when you're running. It's going to show up when you guys are trying to push through something, and that's what we investigate that and try to figure out why that's happening.
So we're going to talk about these planes of movement, and for our purposes today, we really just looked at 2 foundational structures, the rib cage and the pelvis, because most of the time those are 2 of the major areas that are dysfunctional and can kind of lead to some issues. But as Lev just stated, every other bone that moves off of that has a relationship with it. So if those things are off, chances are that the relationship with those other bones is off as well. So in terms of the frontal plane, that would be more of a side bending movement. Like if you want to demonstrate rib cage, pelvis, and then putting it together, obviously we have the diagrams for you as well to kind of make it make sense.
So we're going to have you guys try these in a moment, but I'll just demonstrate them quickly before we do that. For the frontal plane, as Pat was saying, that's a side bending plane. When we assess these, we want to make sure that we're not having any of the other planes of movement sort of bleed into these movements. We want to see how well you can isolate each particular movement and plane. There are certain exercises in the gym that really emphasize one particular plane of movement, and if that just so happens to be one that you excel at, guess what? You're going to naturally fall in love with that movement, probably get stronger and stronger, and love it. You may not know why. If, however, there's a plane of movement that you try today and you're like, I don't know how the hell these guys are even doing that, we're going to probably name an exercise or 2 that goes on in the gym, and I will bet money that you will probably say, I don't really love that exercise, right? Even if it's not a nightmare or causes a ton of pain, you're just going to say every time you see that in like the workout, you're like, dang it. All right, we're doing those today, right? So the frontal plane that I'm about to demonstrate, when you try this in a moment, this is usually one of the trickier ones. It's just side bending. So the rib cage, I think, is a bit easier to move and understand, at least here. Your rib cage and your pelvis, right here. I'm gonna see how well I can take my ribs on one side and bend them straight down to my pelvis The closer that my left ribs get down to my pelvis, the more my right ribs move away from my pelvis, right? And then I try to do the same thing on the other side. We're looking for quality of movement here. You guys are going to be able to do some version of this, but we're seeing how clean can you do this? How far can I side bend in one direction? How comfortable is it? Can I breathe when I'm here? And then I try to go the other way. Breathing is especially important when we're trying to move our upper body, because many of us have a rib cage that's sort of limited, compressed, cockeyed in certain positions, and what that means is that you do not breathe into certain areas of your rib cage particularly well. So that's going to set you up for success or failure depending on what positions we're in. So when we side bend,
You guys
I go
can stand
here.
up and do it with them while
Yeah,
they're
give this one a shot. When you side bend your rib cage, you're just trying to think about that crest, right? That space between your ribs and your pelvis. You can put your hands at your side, and you're going to try to slide one hand down to your knee. When you do, think about this closing down. You should feel some engagement
Try to
here.
get the top of your head pointed up to the
Yeah, I was
ceiling.
gonna say,
Yeah.
almost every single person did this, right? Which means you have difficulty dissociating your skull and your rib cage.
Yes.
If you keep your head at neutral, and we just move the ribs themselves, you're probably gonna feel quite a stretch on one side of your body.
Yeah.
You're gonna feel like you're trying to use your upper trap to maybe go to one side. Right.
When your head is stuck with your ribs like that, that oftentimes does mean that you might be someone who struggles a bit with neck or shoulder discomfort, because naturally these positions should be occurring, and it's a nice stretch. You go back and forth, but if not, you don't ever get that stretch, right? So when you guys get into a big side bend, try to take a big breath of air in and feel how the air goes to the opposite side of your body, right? Feel how big of a breath can you take in? Is it easy? Is it hard? And then side bend in the other direction and try the same exact thing. Try to breathe in and feel the air go into the other side of your body. Many of you are going to feel right here, right now, on our very first movement, a pretty big imbalance. That breathing is easier in one direction, way harder in the other. Maybe the movement itself.
I'm loving your reaction. by the way.
Because my head is not interested in doing that.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
I'm just wondering how many things, everything cracks. It's normal.
So this is something that you don't really visit, and now that you are, things are loosening up.
Yeah,
This is-
everything just like.
Okay?
This is what we talk about with like you guys, bringing some awareness to your own body, right? Obviously, the side bending plan for you is not really, you're not accessing that the way that we would like.
Yeah.
And it's very difficult for you. So what are the chances on a regular basis that you're using your side bending plan, the way that you should? That's the reality.
What are the chances you have shoulder pain?
Yeah.
Rotator cuff injury.
So, well, there you go, right? Like, yeah, we tie a lot of injuries to these main structures, which is why we love talking about them. A lot of people with shoulder pain, when they go to a standard PT and they do 10,000 of these, if they get better, very lucky, and then they're good, right? Yeah, and going in as well.
Well, we were like, you said, like, her PT was like, oh, you gotta stop CrossFit. And that's like exactly what you guys were gonna say.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah.
doing your intro.
For us, it's not what you're doing, it's how you're doing it, right? Like, CrossFit's not the problem, it's the way that you're doing certain movements. And if we can bring exponentially more awareness into your body, what mistakes you're making, how to potentially modify the most troublesome exercises for you to say, this is brand new to me, and now that I'm finally learning how to do this right, I gotta back off a bit, and then you start climbing back into that normal exercise and you're good to go. For someone who side bends very poorly, an exercise that I'm assuming you guys do a ton of in here is like if you're ever doing a suitcase or a farmer's carry, you have weights on one side of your body, what do you think is keeping you nice and neutral here? It should be how well you can manage your rib cage in the frontal plane. This weight is trying to drag me down. Over here should be what brings me up. But if you don't know how to do that very well, you know what you're gonna do? You're gonna shrug that weight and you are going to torch your neck, right? And a lot of people might shrug a little bit when they're struggling, but the main idea is to understand when you're going into exercises, where is this supposed to target in my body? The goal is not just to carry a weight to the other side of the room, it's to do it using certain muscles so that you get stronger with certain things, right? I want to learn how to be able to actually anchor my ribs in these planes of movement, right? Now the pelvis is even trickier, not for everyone, but for most, in that same plane. And the way that looks is, if you watch my belt right now, it's parallel to the ground. I want to see how well I can take one of my hips, dropping it straight down, and the other bringing it straight up. Then I try to do that the other way. This might be very tricky for you in both directions. For most people, the first time I tried doing this, I didn't even know how to move the centimeter. So
Figure it out.
I like to tell people to imagine that they're doing a straight-legged march, to understand that there's a push and a pull, right? I'm trying to drive one of my feet into the ground to help the other one go up, and then vice versa. Then this foot goes into the ground and the other one comes up. This might be a perfect time to discuss.
So,
When you are having a difficult time in one plane of movement, the way that we all normally compensate is by very naturally bringing in another plane of movement that we are really good at. What are most of us really good at? Extension in our lower back. So if you're trying to hike your pelvis, keep an eye on how much you are arching your lower back to help you do so, right? That's again why so many people come in to see us and say, my lower back is a nightmare. And then we assess their body and their movement patterns and we say, your lower back is not the problem. Your lower back is tired of being the solution, right? You can't do X, Y, or Z. And your lower back keeps saying, I guess I'll do it. That's why you think you have lower back problems. And that's why every time you go to a PT or talk to anyone and they just give you strengthening drills, you are making the answer to all of your problems that much stronger, which is gonna help a bit. But it's still not addressing the fact that you have things that you're just not doing. So your lower back is always going to be skating on thin ice because of how much work it has to do, right? You were gonna say something more?
I was just gonna say, like, when you guys do these movements, like Mike said, you want to do them as cleanly as possible. So, like, if you're doing a movement and you're like arching your back, rotating your legs out, don't do that. Try to do less, because you're gonna find out more in not doing as big of a movement in your body than you will trying to like cheat and getting more of a movement. So just try to just as simply as you can, do as little as you can, and try to feel those structures moving, rather than trying to really like grind it out. Because you're gonna kind of use speed and cheat, and then just not get a solution.
Yep.
To what's going on.
Dysfunctional movements and injuries, they happen because you cheat some of these planes of movement and don't access the things that you're having difficulty doing and you use something else. So.
The last one is just putting it together. Your rib cage and your pelvis have a opposing relationship so that if one goes left, the other goes right to help balance things out, right? So how this would work is whatever hip you're trying to get up, that same side rib you want down. So as both crunch towards each other, you should obviously feel some good engagement here on one side of your trunk and a lot of stretching on the other side of your trunk. Now when you breathe in, you should definitely feel how air is very much being driven into the open side of your body. And then we try to go the other way. Feel that stretch, right? I'll tell you what, this probably feels like a nightmare, but you guys are not doing that bad. We see people move all day, and it gets way worse than what you guys are doing. You look pretty decent.
As Lev described before, every single plane of movement falls into walking, right? So when you're landing and loading on one side, that pelvis is side bending up, and your ribs are side bending down every single time you land, and then you have to decompress that to take your next step to go to the other side.
We do a lot of loaded carries. A lot of loaded carries.
Yes.
We just did it this morning.
I would say too that like Allie and Johnny are like crazy about like telling you what you should be feeling. Yes. While you're doing it, not like, you know,
You're going to see as we go through some of the drills, and Pat probably experienced this when I went through a couple of drills with him. The main thing that we want you to walk away from when you walk away from the drill is not memorizing each step-by-step manner how you do it. We want you to remember what you felt when you did it. Because if you can reproduce what you felt, you're going to do that movement correctly and use the right thing in order to execute that. Right? So in terms of the sagittal plane, the flexion extension plane, again, same two structures, Mike will go through it.
Flexion and extension. We'll start again with just the rib cage, okay? This and this plane of movement I find is tricky for a lot of people. Remember that your rib cage is connected all the way throughout. So when I move the front of my body, I want to see how the back of my body moves accordingly, right? So I put my hands on my chest and I try to drive my sternum down towards the ground and back into my body.
You guys are going to notice that skull and ribcage thing again, where when you move in a certain way, your head wants to go with you. Try to keep your head in neutral. Let
You
the
want,
ribs move around it.
as your chest comes down, you want to feel how your ribs in the back come up. Your shoulder blades, they sit on your rib cage. So you're going to feel how your shoulder blades feel very elevated, almost like you're shrugging a little bit, right? For a lot of us who have constant upper trap tension, shoulder blades that ride really high, really difficult to squeeze your shoulder blades down and back, even though people tell you relentlessly to do so. We notice that a lot of people who struggle with that, it's because their ribs are stuck here. My shoulder blades are sitting so high right now that I can't bring them down unless I know how to move my ribs as well. Moving your ribs, you want them to drive a little forward and up, trying to take that point on your chest and bringing it closer to your chin. When you do so, you should feel how the ribs in the back start to drive down. Your shoulder blades naturally drop. Your upper traps naturally run away from your ears. And you hopefully feel some sort of engagement in your middle back as you try to extend a little bit through your middle back, right? So back and forth looks like this. Flex down. When I breathe in this position, I should feel air going into my back, because I'm kind of closing off the front of my body. And then when I come up in the front, now I should feel air get driven into the front of my body. Everybody has different feelings with this, but a lot of people have an extremely challenging time really breathing into the front of their body and getting this position to work very well for them.